everyone, it's Alice, and today it is time to talk about all of the books that I read in May. The first book that I finished was Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. This is a nonfiction book and it's Trevor Noah's memoir, and it's all about his experience of growing up in South Africa, being born to a black mother and a white father during apartheid. I've had this book for ages and I can't believe it's taken me this long to read it, but I'm so glad I finally did because this was so good. This is my favorite type of memoir. It's a bunch of stories told from the viewpoint of a really interesting person who seamlessly balances humor and the more serious stuff. We get to take a look at apartheid in here, racism, and the time in South Africa after apartheid, which I thought was really interesting. And we also get to explore a little bit of South African history and culture, which I loved learning more about. My favorite stories in here were definitely the ones about Noah's mother, and you really feel like you get to know her throughout these pages, and she is such an intriguing and fascinating woman. I also love how you can see how monumental that relationship is for the author, and I think in general this book does a really good job of exploring familial relationships. I also think that this is well structured and well written, and it's honestly one of the best memoirs I think I've ever read. Like, it really is that good, and I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. And it's the kind of book that will make you think, but you'll also get a laugh in the process, and it just does all of it so well, and it's just absolutely fantastic. Secondly, I read Kan jeg bli med deg hjem by Maria Aubert. This is a short story collection, and this title translates to Can I Come Home With You? And these stories are all about different people who are sort of going through changes in their lives. So I don't really have that much to say about this book, to be honest. I read it and it was alright, but it didn't really do a whole lot for me. I do like the writing style in here, but I think I would probably prefer it in a longer format. And I just felt like these stories were very ordinary to me and that they didn't really make much of an impact. I do think that the theme of relationships between people and people going through changes is interesting, but for some reason this just didn't manage to hold my attention. I would be happy to read something else by this author, maybe like a longer novel or something, but this particular one didn't really do a whole lot for me, so I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. Next, I read Wildflower by Drew Barrymore. This is a nonfiction book. It's Drew Barrymore's memoir, and it's all about her experiences and challenges and adventures. So this one was just not it for me, and I didn't really go into this with that many expectations, but I am a little bit disappointed anyway because I kept this book for so long and I should have just let it go. This whole thing felt very surface level to me, and I feel like we kind of just glazed over a lot of different things, and it's the kind of book that sort of makes you feel like you're seeing everything through rose-colored glasses. It was also surprisingly tedious as well. Like, there are parts in here that are just really boring and not really all that interesting, and I just felt like there were very few moments that were like really raw and emotional. The only one that I can really think of that I liked was like one part where she writes about her dog. The stories in here feel really disjointed to me, and I think it could have used some more structure or something. And I also didn't really like the writing style. I got kind of annoyed with it, to be honest, and it feels kind of childish in a way. And there are parts where like every other sentence will end with like one or multiple exclamation marks, and it just, I don't know, it didn't work for me. I think it could have used some work. I do think that maybe the main reason I couldn't get into this is that it feels to me like this person lives on a completely different planet than me, and I just couldn't get into it, so I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. It's just very Hollywood, for lack of a better word. I do still love this cover though, like that part is excellent. After that, I picked up A Room by Emma Donoghue, and this is a contemporary fiction novel, and it's about a mother and her 5-year-old son who live in this very small room, and this room is the only world that this kid has ever known. But he is like getting older now and more curious, and his mother realizes that they cannot stay there, so she starts looking for a way out. I remember this book was everywhere a few years back, and I've had it since then, and I'm glad I finally read it, but I do suspect that I would have liked it more if I'd actually read it a few years ago, because this is the kind of book that a lot of people talked about, and I kind of picked up on a lot of things along the way, and I kind of knew everything that was going to happen in here. I think the strongest part of this book is the choice of perspective. We see this whole story through the eyes of the 5-year-old boy, and the author is really good at capturing his voice and his inner thoughts and the way that he views everyone around him and the world around him. The book is split into 2 parts. The first part is all about life inside the room, and the second part is all about life outside the room. And for me, the first part worked best, like that was the part I was most intrigued by. And I felt like in the second part, something happened that like, it wasn't anything in particular, but I just found that the book struggled to hold my attention, and I felt like things were kind of predictable and it got a little bit repetitive after a while. I am glad that I finally got around to this. It was worth the read even though it didn't like blow my mind, so I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. Then I read The Grace Year by Kim Lidgett, and this is a YA dystopian novel, and it's set in this isolated village where we meet a 16-year-old girl who is about to be sent away for her grace year. And the grace year is this thing that all 16-year-old girls have to do in this village. They're sent away for an entire year to live out in the woods, and they do this to dispel their magic, which apparently is capable of making them like drive men crazy and drive wives into fits of jealousy. So they're sent into the woods to dispel whatever magic they carry. I'm always intrigued by books that say they're like feminist dystopias, and I'm glad that I read this one. It had some things in it that I really liked, and then there were a lot of things that I didn't really like, and it was kind of like a mixed experience for me, this one. I think this started off really well. I liked getting to see this village and try to like figure out what's going on and how everything works, like the society and the religion and the culture. I really liked that. I do think that the characters are interesting, if a little bit stereotypical maybe, and I really liked the part where they're sent into the woods and they have to travel a bit to get there, and I felt like there were parts in the beginning there that were really atmospheric, and I really liked that. I also really liked in the beginning we got to see like the dynamics between this group of girls. I thought that was really interesting, but then about like a third of the way through the book, or maybe a little bit further in, the book kind of takes a turn, and I think that this is partly personal preference, but I really didn't like when suddenly a huge chunk of the book was just about this romantic storyline that just kind of came out of nowhere, and it didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. And then I kept reading and we got to the end and I was kind of disappointed by it. I do think that this could be pretty good for the right reader though. Like if you like YA and a lot of the tropes that are often in YA and you enjoy romance, you might not dislike the parts that I disliked as much. And I do think that the world in here really is very good, but it's just not enough for me, so I gave this a 2 out of 5 stars. One cool thing to note about this though is that there is actually a little bit of Norwegian in here, which obviously, because I am one, that was kind of cool to me. But I just have to point it out. It was a little bit odd too, because there is like a sentence in the beginning of the book that's written in like a weird way, because in the Norwegian alphabet we have 3 extra letters that they don't have in the English alphabet, and the sentence was written in the way that you would write it if you were writing on like an English keyboard and you didn't have access to those letters. And I figured they either did that because they just decided to print it like that, or that was the way that they wrote in this world. But then we get to the back of the book and there's another sentence, and that one is written correctly, like with those letters. So I don't really know why they wouldn't be consistent with that, like do it one way in the beginning of the book and then the right way in the back of the book. It's just something that I noticed. It has no bearing on the story or anything. It was still cool to have like a little bit of Norwegian in here. Second to last, I read and finished The Diary of a Bookseller by Sean Bithell, and this is a nonfiction book. It's kind of like a memoir, and the author is the owner of I think the largest secondhand bookshop in Scotland, and this is his diary spanning over about a year, and it gives us a look into the daily running of the shop, the book trade in general, and like dealings with odd and eccentric customers and colleagues. I think a lot of book lovers really appreciate a good book about books, and that's exactly what this is. It's a charming and funny account of the life of a bookseller, and I found it to be very enjoyable. I really loved getting to know the ins and outs of this shop and getting to know the owner and the people working there and seeing all of these like odd characters coming into the shop. And I also really like how this book comments on the changes that have happened in the book industry for the past like 20 years and how difficult it is for booksellers to deal with that change. It did take me a little time to get into this book though, I will admit, but when I was about like 50-60 pages in, I was really into it. And it is the kind of book that does get a little bit repetitive after a while, but I feel like that makes sense because sometimes life is just like, it's all repetitions and it's just how it gets sometimes. Overall, this was very enjoyable though, and I especially enjoyed the grumpy, slightly pessimistic tone that this has, which I feel like is something that anyone who has worked or is working in retail can relate to in one way or another. And I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. Lastly, I finished 7.5 Lessons About the Brain by Lisa Feldman Barrett, and this is a nonfiction book. It's a science book, obviously, about brains and where they come from, how they evolved, how they're structured, and what we know about how they work. I always love a good, like, short science book that explains things in a really understandable way, and that's exactly what this is, and what I learned from this was fascinating. The lessons in here are really interesting, and I really enjoyed slowly making my way through them, and I learned some things in here that sort of corrected things that I thought I knew, and then I learned a bunch of new stuff, which is really cool. The brain is complicated and complex, but the author manages to make everything in here understandable. It doesn't really go that deep into the topics, it stays very much on like the basic level, but that makes it perfect for someone who is new to the topic. What I love most about these types of books is that they usually make me want to like learn more about something, and that's exactly what this did for me, so I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. And I really want to read more books about the brain now, so I guess if any of you have any recommendations, please send them my way. It's a little niche, I guess, but you never know. Okay everyone, those were all of the books that I've read in the past month, and as always, I would love to know what you all have been reading lately. As usual, links to my Patreon and other social media will be in the description if you're interested, and I will see you soon. Bye!